I thought, well, you know what? Perhaps what I could do that might contribute to help set the stage for what you're going to see and what you're going to hear the rest of the way is to think about roots. You know, we think of Tuscany and we think of, under the Tuscan sun, and we think of Renaissance Florence, and we've got the great medieval cathedrals that are there, right? We can go to Arezzo, and we can go to Siena, and we can look at all these things. But it's not like it all just popped up on a Thursday, right? It's got roots. There's a history. There's a past. And what I thought we could do today is just play around with those roots and to play around with that past and perhaps give you a little bit of context, help you frame out what's going to happen the rest of the way. And so I come up with this, right? Etruscan roots of the Tuscan legacy. The region of Tuscany during the Roman period, the classical age, was known as Etruria. The people of the region were referred to, and we referred to them as Etruscans. Well, those are the ancestors of Tuscan, of the people of Tuscany. This is the kind of cultural and historic roots. And the thing about it is when I was in school 100,000 years ago, when the dinosaurs were still on the planet, everything that had to do with the Etruscans was prefaced, remember, Nina, with mystery, right? An enigma. Who are they? Where'd they come from? What are they doing, right? We got all of these tombs, we got nothing else, and we got these weird, funky pieces of sculpture, and we got urns, and we got pots, and we got the stuff. Who are these people? It's a mystery. There are reasons why it was a mystery. So what I thought we would do today is to take a look at our friends, the Etruscans, who are no longer an enigma. They're no longer a mystery. They are a rich and vibrant people who played an important role in shaping the foundation of what we think of as Roman civilization and culture. They're players, and they're influential. And so we're going to take a look at that here. Okay, this is not an Etruscan building. This is actually a 15th century Renaissance church sitting outside the walls and a little bit down the hill from Cortona. And I know that Cortona is the launching place, right? It's where you guys are going to be based on the tour. This is a 15th century church, Madonna del Colciano. It's associated, the legend has it that what happened was this is where the tanners were. You know, the guys that work with leather, that's not, it generates aroma. So we don't want that inside town. So go out to the walls, go down the hill, clear your spot, and do what you got to do with the hide. Yeah? Supposedly, the Virgin Mary appeared to some tanners. It was a miracle event. They dedicated the church. Okay, so that's not Etruscan. What am I doing? Many, many years ago, I had the chance to go with a student group to Italy, and we were based out of Cortona. And this was either day 1 or day 2 of the trip. We got to load up the bus. We had 50 some odd kids. The bus has got to roll at 8 o'clock because we got to go. So I'm standing out there at about 7:15, and it is cold. It is cold. But it is clear. See that blue sky? It is cold, but it is clear. And I'm standing there next to the buses, and I go over to the wall there at the parking lot, and I look down. And the fog has settled. It's almost like the clouds themselves have settled. And the only thing that I can see of this church is that cupola, is that dome. The rest of it, I'm looking down, and it's white. It's the fog, but it's thick, and it looks like cloud, and it's white, and all that's there is that dome. And I'm taking pictures of it, and yes, I tried to find it, and my wife helped me look, and no, I couldn't find the picture. God knows, we got closets full of pictures of kids. I have no idea where that photo is. I wanted to use it, but I couldn't. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, good Lord, this is God's view of the earth. And the tour guide comes up to me, and we start talking about it. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. She said, there's always been an altar there. Hold on a minute. This is a 15th century church. There's always been an altar there. Think about that. Many of the places that we think of as Renaissance churches, or we think of as medieval cathedrals, or whatever it is that we think of, are spots that throughout history, the people who have lived there have seen and understood that that space was sacred. How it was defined and how it was contextualized and how it was understood could change over time, but sacred space was sacred space. In other words, notions of sacred space are deeply rooted in a place and in a people. And so as we do this today, I want you to think about roots, foundation. In this case, of our friends, the Etruscans. President Baxter, I have a map. I actually have 4. Prepare yourself. This is a map of Etruria. And I grabbed this map. It's originally appeared in a National Geographic. I grabbed this map because it does a nice job of showing you not only where Etruria is located in the Italian peninsula, but Etruria's relationship to Rome. Yes? And you may not be able to tell it from out there, but there's some shading. Can you guys make out the shading? Right? Okay. So the darker green here is Etruria proper. So this shows you basically the region up to 750. What gets you through what we call the Villanova period, the very early history of it, the settlement, the development of towns, and all of that sort of thing, to the point at which she then the Etruscans begin to encounter what's called, it's called Orientalizing, but what it is basically is they're engaging the Greeks, the Eastern Med. And then you notice that between 750 and 500 or so, there's a lighter shade. Does everybody see that? That lighter shade represents Etruscan expansion to 500 BCE. And notice that when that expansion occurs, there's Rome. So I use this map because I wanted you to get a sense of the fact that these folks are players. That when we talk about Rome, we need to understand that these folks here, the Etruscans, are a force that we have to reckon with. While we're talking chronology and timeline stuff, keep in mind that's as extensive as it gets. As we're going to see, after 500, there's this contraction. And here's the thing that helps to contribute to our enigma. Etruria is fully absorbed into a larger Roman world by about 100 BCE. And there's no 28 volumes of letters or documents that tells us the tale of Etruria as we have with Cicero's letters. It's absorbed. So, the Etruscans. All right, so let's think for a minute here. about origins. There are basically three theories in terms of where these folks come from. How do we understand where these folks originated? Well, theory number one is from the Greek historian Herodotus. Herodotus. And Herodotus, of course, is famous not for writing a history of Rome, but for writing a history of the Greco-Persian Wars. Right? And he argues that essentially the Etruscans came from a region of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, known at the time as Lydia. And I thought I would share this with you, so bear with me. A reading from Herodotus, the Histories, Book 1, Chapter 94, Section 5. He's talking about Lydia, the Lydian people of the western Anatolian peninsula. But when their troubles did not cease, but became even more acute, the Lydian king decided to divide the whole population in half and draw lots to determine which half would remain and which would emigrate from the country. He appointed himself king of those whose lot it was to remain, and named his son Tyrannos to be king of those who would have to depart. Those whose lot it was to leave the country went down to the coast at Smyrna, procured ships, and put on board all of their movable goods, and sailed away in search of new land in which to gain their livelihood. They sailed past the lands of many peoples until they finally reached the land of the Umbricoi, the Umbrians, where they halted, built cities, and still dwell to this day. Moreover, they changed their name from Lydians to Turanians and commemorate the king's son who had led the expedition. A reading from Herodotus, the Histories. I so badly want to say blessed be his name, but I won't. Right? The Turanians. Okay. How about our Roman historian, Livy? Well, Livy, he argued that what happened was these folks originated in a region of the Danube River Valley, and that they migrated south, came down through the Alps, settled in Etruria, started to build their settlements and their towns. One more. So we've got a people who migrated from modern-day Turkey, right? Anatolia, that migrated down through the Alps from Europe. And then we have Dionysius of Halicarnassus writing in the Augustan period who said, no, they're indigenous. They're an indigenous people who were known as the Racina. Well, religious texts that do survive from the Etruscans give us a fourth theory, that the original kind of patriarchal, semi-divine founder of the Etruscan people, Tages, rose from the earth of Tarquinia with a copy, an intact copy of the Etruscan Guide to Ritual and Cult and Belief, known as the Etrusca Disciplina. So we got Lydians, we've got Europeans from the Danube, we've got indigenous, and we have the Etruscans rising from the earth itself. Cool. How do we address this question in the 21st century? Well, I was looking at, in preparation for this, I was looking at an article written by a man named Lorenzo Rosella. It appeared in Archaeology back in 2010. And in his essay, in Roselli's essay, it really does, there's a great emphasis upon the role that archaeology and modern science plays. In fact, we get a report of a study, of a DNA study that was done, in which scientists went and they took DNA samples from 3 communities that had, according to their assessment, the most direct kind of ancestral ties to the Etruscan people. And then they did DNA analysis and they did a bunch of comparative studies. Anybody care to guess what the DNA test showed? What do you think? It's interesting. Turkey. Of course, it's debated, right? I mean, that's one of the great things about the discipline and the study of the past and the study of history is that you get a lot of consensus. Very rarely do you have anything carved in stone, hard and fast, definitive. But DNA pointed us back toward Turkey. Because of the limited nature of the textual source material that we have to work with, we're really indebted to archaeology, the study of material culture, to understand these folks. And what we find as we look to the work of our colleagues is that the Etruscan civilization was dynamic. It was full. It was accomplished. It was sophisticated. These folks engaged in a network of Mediterranean trade. They not only imported luxury goods, they exported materials. They lived in a region that was rich. And so their world and their lives reflected that kind of wealth and that kind of sophistication. They were masters of metallurgy, as we're going to see, with a complex view of life in the afterlife. Let me show you just a couple of examples that illustrate some of this. A great deal of what we have been able to glean about the Etruscans, of course, comes from their burial sites. You know, if we go back and we look at that, that's the plain. That's the plain of Tarquinia. And you see the little structures in the back that points to, and you're looking at an Etruscan necropolis. Necropolis, the city of the dead. Right? There are some 70 different tombs that have been excavated and found there. Right? So there's this tremendous kind of investment in a sense of what happens after death and how we prepare for it. This is one of the most famous examples of sarcophagus design and construction that's Etruscan. It's the sarcophagus of the spouses. It's in Rome. I don't believe your itinerary takes you to Rome, but if you add it on and you go to Rome, head off there and take a look at it. Stylized work, yes. Not a whole lot of what we would call necessarily naturalism, but you get a sense there of the kind of artistic sophistication and ability of our friends, the Etruscans. How about frescoes, painting? Lots of this. Even in tombs where professional grave robbers emptied it, the frescoes survive. Right? This is a really kind of uplifting one. You can see the kind of influences that are there. Right? This is the tomb of the leopards. Look at the music and the dancing that's going on. There's also, I didn't put it up here, but there's also a tomb that's called the Tomb of the Blue Demons that kind of shows the flip side of this, in which the walls and the frescoes are covered with all representations of all those spirits that Etruscans believed you had to deal with and you had to mitigate when caring for the dead. How about a little gold? Hair clips. Notice the detail. It's sophisticated work. This is just one example. After I'd already prepared this, I found a guide to the Etruscan collection that's at Penn, and they just have cases full of beautiful, delicate, fine gold work that Etruscan artisans and craftsmen produced. In-demand stuff. The gold. This is a Gorgon. It's a painting, water vessel. Dates from about 490. Founded in a tomb in Tarquinia. Art historians that have analyzed the work have basically concluded that this is the work of the Berlin painter. That's a name the scholars have given him. There's not an Athenian, potter whose name is Berlin, right? We don't have that. But this stuff is in Berlin, so they call him the Berlin painter, right? This is in a tomb, an Etruscan tomb that dates from 490, 480 BCE. It's an Athenian potter. Painted a Gorgon. This is a people that's locked in, linked in to a larger Mediterranean world. And that Gorgon, by the way, is just an example, again, of these kinds of spirits that are represented in these tombs that the Etruscans are worried about. As James Millard argued, these Gorgons are ancestors of our medieval gargoyles. And then there's the bronze. In Florence, at the National Museum of Archaeology, we have the chimera. It is a masterpiece of bronze sculpture. It is an Etruscan piece. It was produced and dedicated for an Etruscan sanctuary. And if you may not be able to see it, if you go and look it up and pull it up on a computer, what you will see is that this chimera's right leg has an inscription on it. Remember that our friends the Etruscans adopted the Greek alphabet for their system of writing, for the Greek letters. And inscribed on his leg is Tinea. And Tinea is the Etruscan equivalent of Zeus. It appears in the art history texts. I think, I was probably an undergraduate the first time that I saw it. Bronze, metallurgy. If you have the suggested readings list, there is a book that's on it by Graham Barker. It's entitled simply The Etruscans. Man, it's a great book. If you want to read it, if you want to read something about the Etruscans and you want to look at something that'll get you through, that's readable and accessible, Barker and Rasmussen's The Etruscans. He says, here's the thing you got to understand about the Etruscans and metallurgy. They were in the perfect place at the perfect time. So you got to remember that one of the things they're doing is they're mining. There's all kinds of natural resources and raw materials and all the stuff that you need in terms of the minerals to produce bronze. They got it. But he goes on and he says, and here's the other thing. The reason they get so good at this is because there's plenty of wood and there's plenty of water. So you got the minerals, the wood, and the water, all the required ingredients to produce bronze and do it right and do it well. And they got it. In-demand art. And then there's this. How many of you have seen this statue before? Okay. All right. So you all know what this is, right? It's known as the Capitoline she-wolf. And this is a bronze statue that, again, I think today you've got to go to the Capitoline Museum. I think it's in Rome, but there are copies of it everywhere on the planet. So this is arguably the single most commonly identified and most well-known symbol and representation of Rome. Right? Because right here is the mythological story. Who are the babies? Does anybody know who the babies are? Right? Romulus and Remus, the twins, the founders of Rome. They've been cast into the river in a reed basket, washed up on the shore. And until that shepherd could find them, right, and could bring them along, who kept them alive? A she-wolf. Okay. The babies are Renaissance add-ons. Everybody with me? The babies are Renaissance add-ons. Apparently, in the region, there was a pretty dynamic, and by region I mean the region of the Tiber, southern Etruria, Latium, where Rome is. It's a pretty dynamic wolf cult. This is debated. But I come down on the side of those who argue that what you're looking at is an Etruscan bronze statue. What do you think of the idea that the very symbol, the mythic symbol of Rome, is actually an Etruscan bronze statue? That's worth thinking about. It was a German art historian in the late 19th century looking at the style, doing a stylistic analysis, right, of the fur in particular, who argued that it was an Etruscan piece of the early 5th century BCE, probably produced in Veii, there in the south. There's been some testing done of the metal. It's inconclusive. It points to, I'm not sure what the science is, guys. You got to forgive me on this. But basically, the kind of analysis that they do of the metal points to a particular mineral that comes from, that they did carbon dating and all that stuff, and they said, and the carbon dating came back as basically it was medieval. But the only problem was the analysis of the material, I guess the mineral or whatever that the bronze is made out of, that what it showed was that it came from a mine that wasn't active in the Middle Ages. All right? So there's debate. But I think there's something to this. It's certainly worth keeping in mind. Which leads me then really and truly, see where my time is, leads me then to ask you to think about this notion of the relationship between this sophisticated Etruscan civilization and our friends Rome. There's our map again. Remember where Rome is, right? Where is there the most direct and clearest kind of convergence here that we can see? Is that, remember, we understand imperial Rome and we understand republican Rome, but before republican Rome, Rome was governed by monarchs. And the final dynasty of monarchs that governed in Rome in the 6th century BCE that bring us right up to the Republic are Etruscan. an Etruscan dynasty, Etruscan kings that brought the experience of their people to the city of Rome and invested in it. An Etruscan dynasty. First, Tarquinius Priscus. Best we can glean, he brings us into about the year 580 BCE. Notice there I've got those little bullet points, right? Has to do with the triumph, hydraulics, and expanded the Senate. I'm an institutional guy, so when Nina knows this because we've talked about this before. So when I get in there and I get into class, I'm talking about expansion of the Senate and what are we going to do institutionally and how are we solidifying and consolidating power. But I don't think you guys want to hear me talk about that. Suffice it to say that with a new dynasty, what do? You get some of your own people into the Senate so that you can, you got loyalists in there. I tell my students all the time, modern politics and modern politicians got nothing on the ancient world. You'll find it all. So what do? You consolidate your base. How do you do that? You bring your own people in. So he expanded the Senate. But here's what I want to talk about. Remember, he's an Etruscan king. Check it out. Okay, so according to Livy, the very first triumph was conducted to honor a victory of the mythical Roman founding father Romulus. What's a triumph? Well, a triumph is a procession. If you've seen any of the golden age of Hollywood where they have the Roman, the epics and stuff, at some point you're going to see this procession scene where a victorious general or an emperor is in a chariot, right? Yes? And they're all gussied up and they're in all their formal attire and all the people are on the side and there's this long procession that winds its way through the city of Rome. And his armies are there, and prisoners of war are there, and the prizes and the booty, and they're all working their way through the city. Well, Livy tells us that the very first one was conducted to honor Romulus. But it's our friend Tarquinius Priscus, according to Livy, who sets out the route. Who says, okay, if we're going to have a triumph, here's where we're going to go, here's where we're going to stop, here's what's going to happen. Yeah? This is a bas-relief of Marcus Aurelius. After the Roman legions have triumphed over Germania, right? There he is. The heralds. And the guy behind the victorious general whispering in his ear that this too shall pass. Right? We're going to stop at the Capitoline Hill. And we're going to make sacrifice to the gods. And we're going to celebrate and recognize their support in our victory. And we're going to work our way through the city and we're going to come to the Circus Maximus where we're going to engage in celebratory games. Again, Livy tells us that Romulus was the first one as part of his triumph. He comes to this region that's going to be known as the Circus Maximus, and he dedicates an altar. But it's Priscus who sets it out. It's Priscus who defines the space. It's Priscus who drains the marshes so that you could do this, right? The Circus Maximus, where of all of the games in the Roman world that were popular and were successful, and we're going to talk about something here in a little bit, it was the games that occurred in the circus that was simply the most popular and dynamic form of entertainment. And we all know what that was, right? Chariot racing. Chariot racing. I had to throw a little Ben-Hur in here and a little Charlton Heston. Right? Isn't that cool? Anybody read Wallace's book? factions, political and theological factions would form over these guys, whose team and all that sort of thing, right? Fandom, right? Fandom gone mad, you know. Almost cost more than one Roman emperor's job. Priscus sets it out. Priscus defines the space. And then I put this up here simply because this, when you talk about water in Rome, this is the thing people think about, right? The aqueducts bringing water to. Priscus invested in a kind of engineering to manage water and get it out, right? Drainage, sewers, cisterns, wells, managing the movement of water so that you can build and expand a city and make it work. That's an Etruscan king. All right, who else? Now we got this one. Here we're back in the debate again, folks. Servius Tullius. The debate over Servius is whether or not he was actually part of this Etruscan dynasty that I'm trying to work through here to the advent of the Republic. Livy says he was. Livy says he was kin. Others have argued because of the name, etc., that he was an interloper. I'm going to defer to Livy. Livy says he was kin. He was a member of this family, maybe extended, but nevertheless. Well, when I talk about Servius Tullius with my students, we talk about a Servian system. Basically a Servian constitution. What he does is he sets up and establishes the basic institutional and military structure upon which Rome will grow and build. Got to take care of your supporters. So he established inside the walls the cult of Diana. Got to take care of your people. And then, of course, for those of you that have been to Rome, the inner walls are the Serbian Walls. Fortified that city. That's the blue. Bringing the Palatine, the Capitoline, the Aventine in particular inside a barricade. Those walls will continue to be built and will continue to be expanded. So he's very important. And then the third and final member of the Tarquinid dynasty, the Etruscan dynasty. Tarquin Superbus. Tarquin the Proud. Livy presents him, again, I think it was Barker who uses this language, as a conventional Greek tyrant, separated from the patrician elite, who should be his advisors and counselors, dependent upon foreigners, refused, this is really an important kind of moment when you think about this, refused the rites of burial to Servius Tullius when he died. That's a terrible offense. At the same time, he oversaw the expansion of Roman power in Latium, pushing south, and oversaw the construction of the temple to Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. The temple to Jupiter. Arguably the most significant temple on the hill. This is a model of what the temple looked like. Suffice it to say, I am no art historian, but suffice it to say that the architectural elements, the use of the columns to create the porch, yes, the roofing, right, the decoration and elaboration, guess what, folks? The temple to Capitoline Jupiter was Etruscan. It was an Etruscan temple. But what our friend Tarquin the Proud is perhaps, at least for us, most famously known for, is the end of the monarchy. It is during his reign that the style of his reign, the components of his reign, his ability to alienate the patrician, the elites of Rome, leads to a breaking point that is facilitated, according to Livy, by a personal attack and a rape of a Roman matron. The rape of noble Lucretia. And so again, a reading from Livy, The Early History of Rome, Book 1, Chapter 59. According to Livy, Tarquin the Proud's son had been sent during a time of war to negotiate with patrician rulers to kind of organize and invest resources to carry out the war. And they had had dinner at the home of a Roman patrician. And Tarquin the Proud's son met the matron of the household, the wife of Brutus, and became immediately enamored of her. And became obsessed with her. Everything went fine at the dinner, everybody went home, but he can't get her out of his mind. And so a couple days later, he decides, you know what I'm going to do? We're just going to go visit again. And you all know what happens. He entreats her. He winds up as a guest of the house. And again, all of those rules and customs of hospitality. Imagine what he's doing now. Because when he's there as a guest, what is he doing? He's basically assaulting her. Challenging her integrity. Begging her to become his lover. And at the end, very long story short, he assaults her. He rapes her. In her home. And then he leaves. Livy writes, the unhappy girl wrote to her father in Rome and to her husband in Ardea, urging them both to come at once with a trusted friend. And quickly, for a frightful thing had happened. Her father came with Valerius, her husband with Brutus, with whom he was returning to Rome when he was met by the messenger. They found Lucretia sitting in her room in deep distress. Tears rose to her eyes as they entered, and to her husband's question, "Is it well with you?" She answered, "No. What can be well with a woman who has lost her honor? In your bed, Collatinus, is the impress of another man. My body only has been violated, my heart is innocent, and death will be my witness. Give me your solemn promise that the adulterer shall be punished. He is Sextus Tarquinius, son of the king. He it is who last night came as my enemy disguised as my guest and took his pleasure. That pleasure will be my death, and his too if you are men." The promise was given. One after another, they tried to comfort her. They told her she was helpless and therefore innocent, that he alone was guilty. It was the mind, they said, that sinned, not the body. Without intention, there could never be guilt. What is due to him, Lucretia said, is for you to decide. As for me, I am innocent of fault, but I will take my punishment. Never shall Lucretia provide a precedent for unchaste women to escape what they deserve. She pulled out a knife, thrust it into her heart, and committed suicide. Her father and husband were overwhelmed with grief. Here it comes. Here it comes. While they stood weeping helplessly, Brutus drew the bloody knife from Lucretia's body, holding it before him, cried, "By this girl's blood none more chaste till a tyrant wronged her, and by the gods, I swear that with sword and fire and whatever else can lend strength to my arm, I will pursue Lucius Tarquinius the Proud, his wicked wife, and all his children. And here it is. Never again will I let them or any other man be king in Rome. Never again will any man in Rome govern using the title Rex. "900 years. Nina could answer this in an instant, right? You remember why it was that all those dudes in the Senate had to go off and stab Julius Caesar 37 times or whatever it was and kill him? What were they afraid he was going to do? He's going to be a king. Use the title Rex. The Republic rises when the last Etruscan dynasty of Rome falls. There's our map. Republican Rome and the conquest of Italy. You can see it. It's broken out chronologically. Remember that what Republican Rome does, while it's working out the internal and institutional complexities of all this, is absorbing into its world and its principalities and under its control, first the Italian peninsula, and then the Mediterranean world. By the time that we get to the Roman Empire at its great zenith, the Mediterranean Sea is simply known as Mare Nostrum, our lake, our sea. And what gets rolled up in this, of course, are our friends, the Etruscans. But here's the thing that I want you to remember, and I want you to think about, is that great Roman expansion, Roman conquest, that complex history of Rome that culminates in that empire, that culminates in everything that we know about Rome, has rooted in it, in its foundation, our friends the Etruscans. They're there. So, I know I'm running tight on time, so let me show you one example. Just one illustration, right? Rome is famous, infamous for its gladiatorial games. Yes? We've all heard about them. Yeah? How many of you saw Ridley Scott's film Gladiator, starring Russell Crowe? Anybody ever seen that movie? Yeah. What the film reviewers say is one of the most iconic and most kind of defining moments in that film is after Russell Crowe's character Maximus, who's a Spanish general who's been enslaved and all this stuff. He goes into this arena, and in about a minute and a half of film time, takes care of 5 different gladiators. Takes him about 90 seconds to get it done. And then, of course, he declares, "Are you not entertained?" He's so disgusted, throws the sword down, spits at him. Are you not entertained? The gladiatorial games. An important presence and component of Roman social history. It had political and religious overtones to it. Before it was all said and done, it gets incorporated into and becomes a mechanism of control and management and power that emperors themselves are going to be using. Well, where does it come from? The Munera. There's a debate. But there's a great number of scholars who will argue that the origins of Rome's gladiatorial games is Etruscan. That it's rooted in the rituals of death and of burial and of protecting the souls of the deceased as they make the journey to the afterlife, that it's ritualized combat. So this is another one of those tomb paintings. It's called the Fersu painting, right? And what you see here is an illustration of what many scholars argue is an example of this kind of ritualized combat and ritualized blood sacrifice as part of a funeral set of rituals. You know, there's this beast here, he's got him a chunk of thigh, all kinds of stuff going on. You've got wrestling, you've got, you know, guys that are engaged in combat. The Augustan author Nicholas of Damascus tells us that the Romans took the munera, took gladiatorial games, ritualized combat, including combat to the death, from the Etruscans. Think about this. The term for an owner of a gladiatorial troop was a lanista. It's an Etruscan word. The home of the gladiatorial schools before Roman emperors started bringing them to Rome was Capua in the south. And Capua, guess what? Etruscan town. Bit later, Tertullian, the great Christian apologist, writing about all of this, he tells us that, and this is much later, this is imperial Roman gladiatorial contests. He says that the deceased, those who died, the gladiators who died in the arena, were removed accompanied by a man who is in costume known as dis pater. Tertullian says that basically this figure is a representative of and symbolizes Karun. And Karun is one of those lords of the dead and the underworld in Etruscan spirituality. It's not unanimous. Just know there's an alternate theory that it came out of the Samnite people, Campania, to the south. But it's worth you considering. If indeed we subscribe to an Etruscan origin to all of this, what do we have? What begins as a ritual that is rooted in funeral ceremony becomes a form of entertainment in imperial Rome with political and economic implications and ramifications. This is a mosaic from the Borghese villa showing gladiators. You want to avoid the theta. See that little guy right there? Right there? Called the black theta. You know what that meant? Those poor fellas died. Yeah? So you want to avoid that whole black theta thing if you can. Oh, the games. The munera. The gladiatorial contest. All right. Running out of time. Let me finish. Hold on. I'm almost there. Give me 3 more minutes. Another map, President Baxter. Everybody have a look, right? You go on a tour. Where's he going to go? You're going to go to Cortona. Then you're going to go to Florence. John. Right? Look up there. See up there? There's the Arno. Florence. Fasulai. Fasole. Okay, so where does Florence fit into all of this? Well, there they are on our map of Etruria. Here's the interesting thing to keep in mind, and I promise I'm going to finish with this. The town Fasulai, right, on the banks of the Arno, in the 1st century, during the civil wars between Marius and Sulla, Fasulai chose the wrong side, and Sulla had the town destroyed, burnt, destroyed, gone, done. The Florence that you visit was founded originally in 59 BCE by our friend Julius Caesar, who established it as a colony for his veterans not too far away from Rome if he ever needed him. But this is the thing that Roman generals do. Aspiring to be an emperor, a ruler, you take care of your own. So he sets up a colony. Now, any of you that travel in Europe and you go to a town or a city that says it's an old Roman, it's an old Roman town or city, right? If they are based on a Roman colony, they are going to be established and laid out according to an identifiable pattern, a kind of grid. Roman colonies were set up on a grid. Squares, rectangles, plazas, perpendicular stuff. It's on a grid. That's rooted in Roman garrison camps, right? You come in, literally a Roman army could build one of these out of wood overnight and lay it out. It served all kinds of logistical, tactical, and strategic purposes. Everybody knew their job and they could put it up. So when colonies are laid out, a city like Florence is laid out, it's laid out on the structure of an old Roman military garrison structure. Go to Florence, go to the oldest part of Florence. John will guide you, he'll get you there. You see it, right? That Roman structure, grid structure, while not 100% linked to, is rooted in, guess what? Etruscan urban planning. Florence. So let me end with this. Florence is understood, and what John and what Nina are going to talk to you about is the vibrancy of Renaissance culture. And Florence as a hallmark of that. Well, let's remember what the term Renaissance means. It means rebirth. Rebirth of what? A rebirth of classical culture. And what is the classical culture that they are referring to? It is, of course, the Latin culture of Rome. And when you're thinking about that Latin culture of Rome, understand that at its roots are our friends, the Etruscans. And in that sense, perhaps we come full circle. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Sorry that I kept you late.
Tuscany is world famous as the birthplace of the Italian Renaissance. It's known for its scenic landscapes, its historic landmarks, and vineyards that stretch as far as the eye can see. Your 3D Journeys Taste of Tuscany experience begins here at Callaway Auditorium, where you'll discover more about the history, art, and literature of the region from longtime LaGrange College instructors.
Colorful, informative lectures, followed by an optional 10-day group visit to Tuscany in May. Hosted by us.
For more information about the spring 2023 trip to Tuscany, email this address and join us at Callaway Auditorium for the next 3D Journeys lecture, coming up on the 4th Monday of this month.
We look forward to seeing you there.